In 19th century England, global trade flourished, bringing silks and spices from distant colonies. Unbeknownst to all, this exchange also ushered in a terrifying plague, the zombie virus. Soon, the undead swarmed the nation. Millions perished and rose again, with an insatiable hunger for brains. The surviving populace turned to deadly martial arts from China and Japan for defense. Eventually, the government erected the Grand Barrier, a formidable 100-foot wall encircling London. Complementing this was the Royal Canal, a deep moat encompassing both the city and its defenses. The strip of land between the wall and the canal became known as the In-Between. Tragedy struck during the Second Battle of Kent. A bridge across the canal was breached, and the zombies annihilated the villagers in the in-between, plunging the king into madness. In the aftermath, he ordered the destruction of all bridges save one. Lords and ladies abandoned London for the safety of their fortified estates. It was at one such estate in Hertfordshire County that Colonel Darcy arrived, drawn by rumors of a bitten individual. A guard meticulously checked his identity at the entrance, then led him through a tunnel to where a priest examined his bare body for any telltale signs of infection. Finally granted entry to the house, Darcy found Mrs. Featherstone engaged in a card game with friends. She vehemently denied the presence of anyone bitten or any zombie incursions on her estate for years. Feigning interest in joining their game, Darcy sat at the table and produced a vial of carrion flies, explaining their ability to detect decaying flesh before releasing them. The flies buzzed around for a mere moment before settling on a man, revealing his slow transformation into a zombie. Without hesitation, Darcy shattered his glass and plunged it into the man's face, before swiftly decapitating him with his blade. He then inquired if the man could have infected anyone else in the house. Featherstone's denial prompted Darcy to kick the zombie's severed head, scandalizing the guests as he made his exit. However, Featherstone's daughter, unable to maintain the lie, rushed upstairs to check on the infected man's niece. Tragically, she was too late. The girl had already turned, attacking the staff and now turning on Featherstone's daughter. Meanwhile, Mr. Bennet had diligently trained his 5 daughters in every known weapon and martial art, preparing them for the zombie threat. His wife, Mrs. Bennet, however, disapproved, desiring them to focus on securing advantageous marriages. Upon hearing news of an upcoming dance, she persuaded her husband to allow their attendance as a respite. All the sisters were thrilled, except for Elizabeth, who detested social gatherings. They donned their finest dresses, yet concealed weapons beneath their elegant attire. Later at the party, Bingley, in conversation with Darcy, was instantly smitten upon seeing Jane. He eagerly asked her to dance, and they shared a delightful time. Afterward, Bingley urged Darcy to dance as well, suggesting he ask Elizabeth. Darcy, however, declared her tolerable yet not handsome enough to tempt him. Elizabeth overheard this slight and, mortified, turned away, accidentally knocking over a bottle and embarrassing herself further in front of everyone. Outside, tears welled in Elizabeth's eyes, but her distress was interrupted by Featherstone, now a zombie. Though undead, she could still speak and attempted to convey something to Elizabeth. Darcy, however, swiftly shot her in the head. The gunshot drew a crowd of curious onlookers. At that moment, another zombie appeared, and the guards frantically rang a bell to signal an attack. While most guests scrambled for cover, the Bennet sisters drew their weapons and fearlessly engaged the zombies. They fought with fierce precision, each strike of their blades and every kick finding its mark. Witnessing Elizabeth's valiant combat, Darcy found himself increasingly drawn to her. Once the immediate threat was neutralized, the zombie bodies were burned. Upon returning home, Jane could not stop gushing about Bingley, while Elizabeth's training sessions were punctuated by rants about Darcy's arrogance and poor manners, ironically intensifying her movements and punches. The following day, Jane received an invitation for tea with Bingley. Mrs. Bennet insisted she travel on horseback rather than by coach, hoping that rain might necessitate an overnight stay. En route, some dogs darted past, pursued by a lone zombie. Jane prepared to shoot, but her horse, startled, threw her and bolted. When Jane attempted to fire her musket, it backfired, injuring her hand. As the zombie lunged, Jane drew her knife, skillfully severing its hands and slashing its legs. Once it fell, she delivered a final kick to its chest and stomped on its head. As rain began to fall, Jane noticed a zombie mother approaching with an infected infant in her arms. The next day, Elizabeth arrived at Bingley's residence to find Jane with a fever. She had indeed stayed the night, and Elizabeth had come to care for her. Darcy, concerned about potential infection, released carrion flies while a doctor examined Jane. The flies showed no reaction to Jane, and Elizabeth swiftly caught them all, crushing them in her fist before returning them to Darcy with a sarcastic remark. Later, Jane joined Bingley and his guests but declined their invitation to play cards, stating her preference for reading. An argument ensued regarding the definition of a real woman, leaving Darcy uncertain whether he was impressed or repulsed. That night, Elizabeth secretly observed Darcy training outside. The following day, the remaining Bennet sisters and their mother arrived to escort Jane and Elizabeth home. Bingley urged them to stay, but Darcy cautioned against the risks of infection. He had another tense exchange with Elizabeth, revealing his knowledge of her clandestine observation the previous night. To ease the strained atmosphere, Mrs. Bennet convinced Bingley to host a ball to uplift spirits. On their journey home, they were dismayed to discover that the local orphanage had been overrun, and zombie orphans now roamed the woods. Sometime later, Mr. Bennet introduced his family to their cousin Collins, who was set to inherit the estate upon Mr. Bennet's death, due to the legal inability of women to be heirs. During lunch, Collins boasted about his patroness, Lady Catherine, a renowned swordswoman who had performed valiantly during the zombie war. He also expressed interest in Jane, but Mrs. Bennet swiftly dismissed his advances, declaring Jane's attachment to Bingley and offering Elizabeth as an alternative. In the afternoon, Collins and the sisters departed to visit their aunt, but their journey was interrupted by a fallen carriage and a woman's desperate cries for help. The sisters readied their weapons, and as the woman emerged, they opened fire, recognizing her as a zombie. Jane delivered the final blow, kicking her down a hill. As they continued, Elizabeth struggled under the weight of the weaponry, but Collins merely placed it back in her arms instead of assisting her. Upon reaching town, they noticed the arrival of new soldiers assigned to protect the area. Elizabeth's path crossed with Lieutenant Wickham, and they immediately formed a connection. Darcy, riding nearby, observed their interaction with jealousy and departed without a word. Wickham confided in Elizabeth about his strained relationship with Darcy, stemming from unresolved family financial matters. That evening, everyone attended the ball. Jane spent her time with Bingley, while Elizabeth attempted to converse with Wickham. However, Collins intervened, pulling her into a vigorous dance. Subsequently, Darcy requested a dance with her, but Collins's awkward interruption caused them to abandon the attempt. On his way out, Darcy overheard Mrs. Bennet discussing Jane's prospects with Bingley, repeatedly emphasizing his wealth. Meanwhile, Elizabeth bumped into Bingley, and they were startled by a noise. Turning, they witnessed a servant being attacked by a zombie. Arming themselves with axes, they followed the sounds downstairs, only for the zombie to grab Bingley, causing him to fall. Elizabeth swiftly slid down and knocked the zombie away before checking on her friend. Looking up, she was horrified to discover a group of zombie orphans hiding in the darkness. When she questioned their presence, a child revealed that their new friend had shown them the way in. At that moment, Darcy arrived and expertly dispatched the zombies with rapid slashes of his blade and a well-placed kitchen knife, even shoving one into the oven. He then demanded to know if Bingley had been bitten, preparing to kill him as a precaution, but Elizabeth assured him it was merely a fall. Before departing, Elizabeth acknowledged Darcy's skill as a warrior, but criticized his lack of friendship. The following day, Jane received a letter from Bingley explaining that his family was returning to London and that he would begin courting Darcy's sister instead. During lunch, Collins proposed marriage to Elizabeth, stipulating that she would have to relinquish her weapons and cease fighting zombies. Elizabeth refused his offer and rushed outside to vent her frustration through rigorous training. Her mother scolded her for rejecting such an advantageous proposal, but her father respected her decision. Elizabeth embraced her father in gratitude, but her mother's continued nagging drove her into the woods seeking solace. In the forest, Elizabeth noticed a flock of birds circling above 4 men in top hats. She was then approached by Wickham, and when she turned back, the 4 men had vanished. Wickham claimed he had seen nothing before inviting her to a special place. Moments later, they arrived at a church where a priest was delivering a sermon. When the congregation turned, Elizabeth was shocked to see they were all zombies. Wickham prevented her from reaching for her weapons as they watched the priest feed the zombies pig's brains. It turned out that infected individuals did not fully transform into aggressive zombies if they abstained from human brains, a discovery Wickham believed held the key to peaceful coexistence between humans and the undead. Elizabeth agreed, suggesting they present this idea to the crown. However, Wickham explained that the war had nearly bankrupted the country, leaving him with no influential contacts to approach for support. Sometime later, a friend of Elizabeth's announced her engagement to Collins and requested Elizabeth to accompany her as a chaperone to meet her future in-laws. At Collins' estate, Elizabeth was amused by a painting depicting Catherine slaying Lucifer. Another painting portrayed the 4 horsemen of the zombie apocalypse, said to herald the end times. Elizabeth realized these were the same men she had seen in the woods. She was then introduced to Catherine and her daughter. To Elizabeth's surprise, Darcy was also present, and she learned he was Catherine's nephew. Soon after, Wickham arrived at Elizabeth's invitation, hoping to solicit funds for his plan. Catherine dismissed the idea of befriending zombies as ludicrous, asserting their inherent lack of reason. Collins, however, countered by citing biblical prophecies of the Antichrist leading the undead. Darcy sided with Catherine and became enraged when Wickham mentioned his father, prompting him to have the guards eject Wickham. Elizabeth rebuked Darcy, accusing him of being as unfeeling as the undead. That night, Darcy spent hours training outdoors, attempting to quell his anger. Elizabeth, unable to sleep due to her friend's snoring, went for a walk in the gardens, where she encountered Wickham. He informed her that Darcy had orchestrated the Bingley family's departure by falsely portraying Jane as a gold digger. Wickham then proposed they elope, but Elizabeth declined. Before leaving, Wickham ominously reminded her that the day of reckoning was approaching. The following day, Darcy declared Elizabeth his inferior yet admitted his attraction to her, proposing marriage. Elizabeth vehemently refused, denouncing his interference in Jane and Bingley's relationship. Darcy defended his actions, leading to a furious Elizabeth kicking him and pelting him with objects before attacking him with a poker. He swiftly defended himself, and they found themselves in a compromising position on a table. Their argument escalated into a full-blown fight, exchanging blows before ending up in another awkward entanglement. When Elizabeth resolutely stated she would never marry him, Darcy finally departed, leaving her in a state of emotional collapse. Later, Elizabeth received a letter from Darcy, offering his explanation. He claimed he had not intended to hurt Jane, only sending Bingley away to protect him from Mrs. Bennet's machinations. He also revealed the painful necessity of killing his own zombified father, but insisted he had still provided Wickham with the promised funds. However, Wickham had repeatedly demanded more, and become resentful of Darcy's refusal. Subsequently, Wickham had attempted to marry Darcy's teenage sister for her inheritance, but Darcy had intervened just in time. Finally, Darcy conveyed his respect for Elizabeth's feelings, and, to overcome his heartbreak, had gone to London to combat a recent, unusually organized zombie outbreak, suspecting a guiding intelligence behind their attacks. Upon Elizabeth's return home, she was horrified to discover that Wickham had eloped with Lydia, her youngest sister. She deduced that he must have taken her to the zombie church. That night, Catherine visited Elizabeth, announcing that Darcy would marry her daughter unless Elizabeth accepted his proposal first. Elizabeth's perception of Darcy had softened, but she remained uncertain about a relationship. Catherine challenged her to a duel against her guard. The man was large and powerful, delivering dangerous punches and easily blocking Elizabeth's attacks. She refused to yield, even when he choked her, managing to slash his face and break his arm. With a powerful kick, she sent him crashing into a beam, causing part of the ceiling to collapse upon him. Catherine cornered Elizabeth with her swords, but admitted her respect for her resolve. At that moment, Mr. Bennet entered, forbidding Elizabeth from attempting to rescue her sister due to the extreme danger. Jane volunteered to help, but Elizabeth refused, wanting Jane to remain and protect the family. Catherine then offered to shelter the Bennets at her estate, allowing Jane and Elizabeth to depart. Reaching the bridge, they were stopped by soldiers who informed them of the extensive explosives they had laid. The bridge was scheduled for demolition at dawn to prevent the London zombie horde from spreading. The sisters ignored their warnings and pressed onward. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Bingley hurled a bomb at zombies trapped in a trench, but as he turned to leave, a creature grabbed him by his scarf. Fortunately, Jane arrived just in time to sever the scarf and push him clear of the ensuing explosion. Nearby, Darcy dispatched another zombie with his sword, only to find a multitude of undead hands reaching up from the ground. A massive zombie lunged at him from behind, but Elizabeth swiftly felled it with an axe. She explained they were standing on a zombie graveyard, and they began stabbing the ground to eliminate the awakening corpses. Afterward, Elizabeth informed him about her sister's presence at the church. Darcy delivered the devastating news that the church had been burned down 5 days prior, implying Lydia's likely demise. As Darcy departed, it was revealed that he had lied, telling Elizabeth the church was destroyed to keep her from danger, while in reality, the building remained intact. He stealthily approached the church and witnessed the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, leading a vast zombie horde. Meanwhile, Elizabeth noticed Bingley's gaze repeatedly drifting towards the road leading to the church, rather than focusing on the bridge where he was supposed to oversee the detonation. This inconsistency confirmed her suspicion that Darcy had lied, and she immediately set off on horseback. At the military camp, a soldier discovered that all the brains had been stolen from the dead soldiers. Back at the church, Darcy entered through a back door and found Lydia chained up. On a wall, he discovered Wickham's plans to attack London with the zombies. At that moment, Wickham appeared, and Darcy offered him money in exchange for Lydia. Wickham refused and opened fire. The bullet struck a gate, and the noise alerted the horde, who surged into the room. It turned out Darcy had fed them the soldier brains to incite their violence. While Wickham desperately defended himself, Darcy broke Lydia's chains to free her. Simultaneously, Darcy's horse pulled the bars from a window, creating an escape route for his master. Once outside, Darcy placed Lydia on his horse and sent her towards the bridge. He then fought off several zombies before being confronted by Wickham, leading to a sword duel as the zombies poured out of the church. In the distance, Elizabeth continued her ride, staring in horror at the sight of London burning. Just then, she saw Lydia and called out her name, but her voice was lost in the chaos. The zombie horde appeared behind her, and Elizabeth drew her sword to cut through their ranks. Lydia reached the bridge just as the soldiers began preparing for detonation. Back at the church, the duel continued, and Darcy managed to stab his opponent. However, Wickham remained unharmed, revealing he had been undead all along, suppressing his hunger for brains through his intense hatred for Darcy. Wickham declared that the 4 horsemen had risen from hell, and that he was the Antichrist destined to lead them. He began choking Darcy, preparing to decapitate him, only to be stopped by Elizabeth, who severed his arm and trampled him with her horse. Afterward, the couple rode away on Elizabeth's horse, pursued by the relentless zombie horde. They reached the bridge, just as the soldiers activated the explosives. The other sisters believed Elizabeth had been killed in the resulting blasts. However, as the smoke cleared, Elizabeth was seen crawling through the rubble. She found Darcy's unconscious body nearby and wept as she kissed him and confessed her love. A few days later, Bingley proposed marriage to Jane, who joyfully accepted. Darcy awoke from his coma and told Elizabeth he had heard her words on the bridge. He then proposed, and she accepted with a kiss. The two couples were married together, with Collins officiating. Their happiness was short-lived, however, as they saw Wickham approaching with a vast zombie horde.